Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to our educational theater. I'm Thomas Hare, the Chief Content Officer of the PDMI, and we welcome you back to PDMIwest educational tracks after our lunch break. We have a great panel set up for you guys today on the podcast environment out there. Some incredible speakers led by the Executive Vice President of Client Success at Casual Precision, Lissie Perkins, and it should be a wonderful event, very informative. As I said, I think at the end of the last one, we've got a real through line going here as we were, presenting the sessions today. You can feel that through line kind of building from TV through to podcast and onward from here. So we're excited about how these are going. Excited to have you back. We're gonna have a quick word from our sponsor, Blue Water Media is our sponsor of our educational sessions this week, and they've got a quick video to share with you.
Familia Ramírez.
Deje el drama para las telenovelas.
Pero ahora no tengo que jugar con dolores. Me pongo Shiffman y el dolor se va.
I'm going to pass it off to Lissie now. Thank you, Lissie, for hosting, and take it away.
Thank you, Thomas. Welcome, everybody, to today's panel discussion on the power of podcasts. As you know, podcast listening has increased tremendously over the last few years, particularly through the pandemic, as we saw media consumption habits organically shift. Those elevated listening habits have extended through today. eMarketer published a report in Q3 of last year stating that over 65% of adults 18 through 34 had listened to a podcast in the last month. Additionally, Infinite Dial's study from earlier this year showed that on average, people are consuming 8.3 episodes of podcasts per week. With that being said, the IAB expects that US podcast ad revenue will top $2 billion this year for the first time. In addition to the increased listenership has come an increase in available content. Q2's top 50 podcasts published by Edison showed that genres encompassed a wide array of topics, from neuroscience to celebrity interviews, comedy to sports, illustrating that there is a podcast out there for everyone. In addition to the increased listenership across most demos, we've also seen a growing trend of diehard fandom. Historically, we've seen podcasts have the ability to sway public and political opinion. We've seen podcasts drive incremental book sales. We've even seen podcasts affect stock prices. Now we are seeing a growing trend of podcast hosts taking their show on the road, and they are selling out venues across the country. We've invited a few panelists here to explore the growing channel. I'd like to introduce them. We have David Shiffman, who is the EVP of Research and Measurement at iHeart Media. Let's give him a little round of applause. We also have Peter Duborg, the VP of Ad Sales at Warner Brothers Discovery.
Thank you.
Perfect. Love the participation. And lastly, we have Eric Steaple, the Director of Ad Sales at Fox Corp. Let's dive in, shall we? So I mentioned in the intro that in 2024, the IAB expects US podcast ad revenue to top $2 billion for the first time. How has podcast growth during the last few years affected how you package your podcast inventory?
I'll take a stab at that. You know, let's go back 5 years to the pandemic. It's hard to believe it's already been 5 years. In some ways, it seems like it's been a lot longer. In some ways, it seems like that was just yesterday. But that's really when we saw the acceleration of podcasts. It took off. We were the darling of the industry. I think we saw 1 million new podcasts produced that year. It all made sense. Podcasts gave us some things, 3 things that we really needed at that time. We needed information. We needed to know what was going on. We were consuming a lot of information, so you needed a break from that information. You needed to be entertained, and it gave us that entertainment. But also gave us the connection that we really needed, a chance to get out of your little bubble and connect with something. For me, it was great. Many of you probably, same as me, you sit back and you pop those earbuds in, maybe pour yourself a beverage of choice, and it was a 1-hour vacation. You could just go away and be somewhere else and escape and connect with that podcast. So it made sense that we saw the podcast space grow and boom. What I don't think anyone would have predicted, that we'd be here 5 years later talking about how the growth is still growing in terms of users, people coming in and listening to podcasts, in terms of time spent listening to podcasts, all still going up and still growing. So, you know, we look back and I think we can point to, as I said, we saw 1 million podcasts produced that year. Fast forward again, that number in terms of new podcasts, it's about a quarter of that every year now. So you look at that without context and you say, well, is this an industry in decline? People aren't making more podcasts. It's to the contrary. I think publishers have really focused on making better content. So it's become quality over quantity, connecting deeper with audiences, just better storytelling is what we've seen, and it's resonated. And I think to answer the question, how have we shifted as publishers? Well, you know, we have right now about 75 live and active podcasts, but that number of total podcasts that we've produced over the time is probably double that. So we've had to figure out what's working, what's not working, and really kind of sharpen our tool belt to really give make it in terms of consumer first experience, giving them what they want and making it a better experience for them. And from the sales standpoint, you know, I think we'll get into that in a little bit. But the devil's in the detail, and in terms of working and making things better from that standpoint.
Yeah. I mean, I'd say when you go back 5 years ago, 6 years ago, the incredible growth in podcasts, I always kind of looked at it and went, at some point, it's going to level off. It hasn't. And I think that's one of the most incredible things about it. I think it's a bit transformative in terms of a new medium in the marketplace and in consumers' lives. It has gone from, and to the question that was asked, we've kind of gone from what is essentially a little bit of a niche medium, where people would find the content filling a gap and a need, to what is essentially mass in terms of what's out there. You know, 50% of people listen to podcasts, period, full stop, 12 plus, people 12 plus, right? Time spent is almost an hour a day on average. And, you know, as we think about the opportunities for marketers and for listeners, it's sort of this combination of mass in terms of scale with all of this incredibly rich, relevant, meaningful content for whatever it is that people want. And I think that's why you see people leaning in, you see the attention, you see the time spent, you see this, and you know, one of the panelists talked about it before, this in your ears, in your brain kind of experience that is just so incredibly rich and meaningful to people. So as we've thought about where the opportunities are, I think some of it is you sort of go from picking specific shows from a marketer and an advertising perspective to how do you sort of balance reads and specific shows and specific content to taking advantage of this full breadth and depth and finding your audience in the places that are most relevant and engaging for them with the right messaging to really drive impact and understanding and engagement with brands. So I think that's been part of the evolution, is from, little pockets to this mass, but there's still these pockets of content and experience that people lean into, right? Entertainment, self-discovery, learning in ways that very few media can kind of offer to people in the way that podcasts do today.
So in terms of packaging your podcast inventory, has there been any move from a baked-in standpoint versus DAI over the last few years as this increase in listenership has occurred?
Yeah, for us, it's all become DAI. We started off, like Eric was saying, before the pandemic. That was really a watershed moment for us as well. But prior to that, we had moved over to DAI. And I think dynamic ad insertion, along with pixel-based attribution, has really changed the business in the past few years. And that's what we're seeing clients really lean into on the performance side, on the brand side, really for both.
I would just tend to agree with that, Pete, that DAI has really become, with technology and advancements, some of the DAI ads, it's hard to really tell if that's real or if that's baked in, particularly if it's a host-read ad that's done DAI. It's really difficult to know whether that's live. It's the quality of the technology is improved. We also like to, where we can, give opportunity for advertisers and brands to have the choice. If they want to go DAI, we have solutions for that. But if they really want to look at doing something baked in, we really work to try to meet them where they are on those from both standpoints.
Yeah, we're predominantly DAI as well. I think that one of the benefits there is, it doesn't mean you can't buy specific shows and specific placements, but you're understanding where those audiences are and how you can serve them and target them in the most effective way to drive the response that you're looking for.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. A follow-up question to that is, and I think Eric kind of touched on this with his explaining that they had produced 150 shows and now they're back down to 75 shows. How has the growth affected your total footprint in the space in terms of available content?
We ebb in and out of the top 10 for Podtrac for unique listeners on a monthly basis. So we have massive scale. I think it's really about creating the allowing advertisers to align, taking a contextual approach and really putting them where it makes sense for them from the standpoint of, are you aligned more with the sports category, the news category, aligning the proper host, having that right contextual, having that flow through line from content through the host, and then taking a look at creative, all of the things that need to work in concert for performance, which is what our North Star is. Scale is one thing, but being able to kind of pinpoint and help bring advertisers along and put them where they need to be is really a big part of it.
So we've got, and the latest Podtrac numbers I think came out this morning. I mean, iHeart podcast is about 900 shows. We have about 30 million unique listeners every month. And then we've got our network that is broader than that. It kind of doubles those kinds of numbers. And the way we've really approached it, scale is important, absolutely. And I think our audiences show that. But I think there's a couple of key things. One is we are across every single device, podcast platform, et cetera. So regardless of where people want to listen, we are there. We own the advertising, so we can be the best partners for you all and your advertisers and all your agency partners. I think the other thing that we've really focused on is it is about the content, right? And building relationships and partnerships with some of the leading podcast producers, personalities, leveraging our radio and sort of over-the-air terrestrial radio personalities and bringing those to life in podcast environments. I think one of the things that's kind of really interesting is where you find all the content creation and where those opportunities are. It is, a great example of sort of the, creator culture that we're living in. But I think what's really interesting is how people have come from other spaces, whether it's TV and video and writers and actors and stars, into the podcast world because they want to be a part of it, right? And what you've also seen is people who have started in podcast content creation who are becoming stars across social and all these other places and platforms. So you really see it, and I think we've really leaned into that as a core and an opportunity to sort of build and expand how we serve our audiences and make those available to advertisers.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's been a real learning curve for us as well. We've found just growing from 0 pods not too long ago to almost 100 these days. There's a lot of different ways you can do that, and for us to take advantage of the things that we do cross-screen, we found that actually QR codes on air, on the mothership on CNN or on TNT or TBS during a basketball game or a Major League Baseball game to download a podcast are actually really effective. And we've seen that be really helpful for our growth, whether it's on the news side for CNN or on the sports side for Bleacher Report as well. And one of the cool things we can do, and I think like one of the best ways to work with us is to kind of make sure we're bringing along our best clients for the ride when we're doing that. And this podcast, don't forget to download Dr. Sanjay Gupta's podcast. That this is brought to you by that client. So we've seen a lot of success with that.
Pete brings up a great point in terms of cross-platform. Fox as WB Discovery is as well one of the few premium publishers out there that represent all of our own IP in the audio space as well as other platforms as well. But we take the strategy that we can, going deeper with one publisher, we can create opportunities that we would not. We can amplify that podcast in different ways with social, with other digital elements as well. And then if a brand is ready to, or is transacting on the linear side as well, we think we can do a great job there in terms of creating efficiencies, in terms of reaching an unduplicated audience as well, and just that ability to go a little bit deeper with a premium publisher.
Nice, thank you. And just for clarification, in case you don't know, Warner Brothers Discovery has all of the CNN podcasts. So we have CNN and we have Fox up here.
That's great.
Okay, let's see if my clicker will.
But we're buddies, though. We're
Old friends, many years.
Could we get the next slide, please? Great, thank you. D2C and performance advertisers are huge players in this expanding space. I'm sure all of you have probably ran a podcast campaign or are running one currently. How do you work with DR and performance advertisers today, and how is that different from how you work with branding clients?
Yeah, I'll take a first stab at this. It is different. Absolutely. I think one of the things that we always try to think about is working with our DR clients, and any client really. What is it you're trying to do? Who is your target audience? What do we know about them? How do we find them? How do we build relevant, meaningful, engaging campaigns and put those campaigns and that messaging in the right place? And sometimes that is a lot of host-read, sometimes it's audience targeted, sometimes it's the combination. One of the things I spend an awful lot of time doing is thinking about what are the objectives, what do we need to drive towards, and how are we going to think about measuring it? And that's one of the core functions that I serve and my team serves within our organization. We've leaned in a lot to measurement and attribution, working with a number of different Vendors, we tend to be, and partners, we tend to be agnostic because everybody likes to work with different partners, different companies, different sets of data, but really working with our advertisers to identify what are the behaviors we need to track, putting pixels in place to be able to track every single one of those impressions and every single behavior that happens as a result of those impressions, bringing that data in and working in partnership and looking at it to not just see, is it working, what's working, how's it working, and how do we drive better improvements and optimization on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. I think one of the cool things about this space in particular, it's still relatively new. I mean, we were talking about 5 years ago. That's not that long. So I think we're all in this bit of learning. We know generally where we think things are going to work for the right audiences and the right opportunities, but every campaign can be a little bit different, and it's really partnering and leaning in and saying, let's understand what it is we're aiming to drive towards against what kind of audiences, where we find those, and then measure. I think the other thing we always try to do is, there's let's bring the data in and look at it and learn and optimize, and a lot of it is sometimes pushing the data out, so being able to provide back user-level data into partner analytics platforms and other places so that you can drive the right kind of learning and optimization to be able to do that. Very different than branding in some respects, because that takes a little bit longer and you've got to build that. We do a lot of that as well, and I actually think that podcasts, to be clear, I think they can be incredibly powerful performance media and drivers. They can also fill that mid and upper funnel as well, but again, those are different and they need to be treated differently, and we fully embrace it.
Yep, very well said. Well said, David. I would only add to that, we see a little bit of difference in terms of the way those brands or performance advertisers come to us. Brands often will come to us with a set of parameters that they want, creative that they want. They kind of know exactly where they want to go with it. But we do find from the performance side, there's more of a collaboration, and we find that works very well. So, being able to set up as many different data points as possible with the idea of hoping that they're all pointing in the right direction in terms of what's happening, in terms of measuring engagement and outcome on a show level with a host, different hosts at a host level, and as many different things that we can. We find at Fox that our viewers and listeners actually like offers specific to Fox. So if it says here's a discount for Fox users, whether that's on the sports side or the news side, we find that resonates with brands or with our audiences as well in terms of response. But again, there's so many different ways. There's SMS text short codes. There's offers, discount offers. We can look at surveys, of course, Pixel. We offer brands direct response or performance or brand advertisers opportunities for brand lift studies as well. So we want to put out and give as many different touch points or as many different data points as we can set up, and of course marry that with the first party data that they bring to us as well. But hopefully at the end it's all pointing in the right direction and we know what's working.
That's great. Yeah, and for us, it's a lot of the same. Whether it's brand or performance, clients are tracking with a pixel-based attribution method. We're including brand lift studies as well for the right investment levels. Really interesting that we've seen, from clients on those brand lift studies where we run it cross-screen and podcast jumps off the charts. We've seen it, outproduce video and linear in terms of things like brand lift and purchase intent, things like that. So it's great to include that when we can, and of course, the performance business is our bread and butter on the podcast side of the house, and we work with clients in a lot of different ways, whether it's working with a specific show or host, or Also working at a lower CPM in kind of a run of type fashion, whether that's for news or across WBD. So excited to work with you all on podcasts.
You guys might want to call Peter. Sounds like he has some deals. With that being said, what do you recommend, or what do you see more predominantly? Is there still a push toward promo code usage, or is it because we're using pixels? Is it just a drive to URL?
Yeah, we've seen both. We have clients use promo codes, even 800 numbers from time to time. Not that much anymore, but so yeah, we work with the clients in a variety of different ways, and the largest of that is the pixel-based attribution at this point.
Yeah, I mean, we work with advertisers across all different outcome tracking, codes, numbers, how did you hear about? I mean, there's all those things that are still in play, and we always want to lean in there as well. But I think it's an and, right? I don't think there is one single signal that is perfect. I would also say that given podcast is a digital and trackable media, the pixel solutions and being able to track those users from an exposure to a behavior is something that should be embraced wherever it can be. I think it's important. I think it adds a lot of fidelity into your insight and what you know and what you can see, and that can be, true incrementality in terms of analytics. That can be understanding the who. It's understanding when people land on a property, being able to track them back, et cetera, those sorts of things. So I think it has a ton of value, but it doesn't mean it's in the absence of what I'll call sort of some of the more traditional DR tracking activities that can be put in place.
Yeah, it makes sense that we, as advertisers, we can still use some of these directional tactics to pick up on a cohort of responsiveness, but also use the deterministic attributes of pixel tracking. So that's great. Now, we are talking to a group of performance marketers, so how would you respond to the statement, I feel the impact of podcasts, but it's hard to track ROAS? And David, you touched on that just now.
So first thing I would say is if that is the feeling, bring it to us, right? Honestly, like bring the challenge to us, because my sense and experience is it is trackable, and I'd say, and this goes back to some of the things that Peter and Eric were saying, right? Do we have the right creative? Are we doing the right targeting? Are we in the right places? Are we leveraging the right combination of podcast assets to be able to drive performance? And I think there's the question of, I can't measure it versus it's not performing the way I wish and hoped it did. And those things are very different. I think it is incredibly trackable as a medium. If the question is more about, I'm not seeing the kind of performance I wished and hoped for, let's deconstruct it, start to understand it, and think about, do we have the right creatives? Are we in the right plans, the right placements, those sorts of things? And I think that all starts with, and echoing what Eric and Peter were saying, was it's in the partnership and where we start, and understanding who you're trying to get. What are you trying to say? How is that being said? And letting the experts who are in the space bring the right kind of recommendations, test, learn, grow, and go together.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, it's about working together to hit those KPIs and get to that return on ad spend, and those conversations that David was alluding to are integral, and we're having them all the time. Obviously, that's a great question for this panel. It comes up all the time, and that partnership is key for sure.
I would just say, beware of anyone that says they have a silver bullet in this space, because there is none. It requires a lot of work, rolling up the sleeves, really digging in. We've got to the point now where we invite talent across the board for the Fox News, for Fox Sports. They come in and we do kickoff meetings where they'll sit with the client and learn about what the client's KPIs are. What's the what's the underlying goal here? Is it to actually get them to go and transact, or is it to just go learn and get more information about a product? What exactly? It's the transparency and understanding what the real goal here of this campaign is, and then allowing the talent will come in and listen and really develop their own thoughts on it, creates a more authentic read, and from that standpoint, authenticity is key. One thing that's really frustrating in the audio space is when we hear an ad that's directing you to do something on screen, or directing you to do something that you can't do, that you know this ad was not created for audio.
For a podcast.
And even gets for podcasts, and specifically, great point, Lissie, as well. It's not even necessarily their ads. There's a nuance to if it's for satellite or terrestrial ad is very different from a podcast ad. That's why we really want to work together with the brand to make sure that you're crafting a story and you're telling that story that speaks directly to that sports user, that NCAA football watcher that's watching Fox Sports for that you're really speaking to them in a way that's authentic to them. And the same would go for if you're speaking to a listener over on the news side. Are you talking to them in a way that makes sense for them, that's authentic? There's so many different parts. It's you think about the aggregation of marginal gains with audio, just getting a little bit better at each little point across the spectrum, just continuing to improve in every which way you can.
Just building up, that sort of creative, right? I mean, the hosts and the creators know their content and their audiences better than anybody.
Yeah.
And they do want to lean in with brands, 100%, and they will, and they do. I think there's still, we're big believers in, you can have scripted, produced spots. You can have host reads as well. They both can work. I think one of the magical things, not just about podcasts, from a creative perspective, but also audio more broadly, you can produce different iterations of ads to be relevant in the right context and constructs for the right audiences, right? At not massive cost. And I think the more you can do that, the more you can lean into those opportunities, the better.
Great point. And that is a good segue into what's next. And one of the things that we wanted to discuss with the group was what we deem as best practices when running a podcast campaign. And I think we've already touched on one, which is the audio needs to be created specifically for podcasting, right? We're not just going to slap the audio of a TV ad into a podcast. What are some other best practices that you like to employ or advise when you're working with DR advertisers?
I think generally we like to test in the 2-month range, like 6 to 8 weeks. I think gives you like a good runway, and getting back to again aligning on the KPIs at the beginning of the campaign so that we can understand how that is going to work, and are we going to include pixel-based attribution in this, that kind of thing. So I think making sure we're aligned ahead of time, and including those aspects of the campaign ahead of time so that we can measure correctly on the back end.
And would you recommend testing one show, something really tiny, or recommend testing something really big, or what would you say to that?
Yeah, great question. We do both. We have a lot of clients that come in and activate contextually with hosts and with genres like news or sports, and then we'll also help with efficiency with a kind of run of Warner or run of CNN audio kind of plan. So we're absolutely open to working in both capacities.
We've seen great success with brands that come in and utilize our sort of 360 packaging, where we'll take a small $25,000 test in audio, but we'll amplify that on the social side as well. That really seems to help push results and drive results. We've seen great success there working with brands from that standpoint as well. And when you talk about what's next from that, I can't help but think about how potentially AI will help us in terms of contextual targeting and being able to really put ads where they make sense, is from a contextual standpoint, but also from a timing standpoint, like really kind of build that out. And for us, it's about focusing on what we do best, staying in our wheelhouse. For Fox, it's sports and news, and under those pillars, with news, we can drill down to business, to weather, to faith and family and lifestyle content, developing content that really is going to be what our listeners, creating better content for them as well. And then on the sports side, looking at whether it's NFL, the Super Bowl this year, or continue with MLB and along with college sports, football and basketball. Again, for us, it's making better content and constantly churning and again, using as much of the tools that are at our power to make sure, at our fingertips, to make sure we are making the best product that we can. And then again, I talked about that media mix, and again, that plays a big part in it too. And we can say we're at multiple touch points across, and being able to use them in concert together is really a great advantage.
Yeah, that's a great point, Eric. I agree. I think we're going to continue to see more audience targeting. Right now, we're not activating clients programmatically for our podcast, but I can see that changing down the road as well, doing a combination of both direct IO and programmatic, but absolutely, expect to see that move in that direction as well.
I think a couple things for me. I agree. I kind of look at gateways in, and it doesn't have to be a huge out of pocket, but test meaningfully. If you test one show, you haven't tested podcast, you've tested one particular show. And that's okay, but I think you need to go in thinking about, what does this medium look like, and how do I test? And it doesn't mean, $1 million in 22 weeks, et cetera, right? You can do these in very contained and reasonable budgets, but lean in and test meaningfully. Part of it is, thinking about, how do you use this medium? How do you understand what it is, what it isn't, how to be relevant, how to take advantage of hosts that have this almost ridiculous level of trust amongst their listeners. It is staggering, and being able to sort of do that, play that out, and again, that sort of trackability. I think audience targeting is something that we do offer. I think that's going to continue to grow, right? It's finding the right audiences in the right places. I think the other thing, and to the sort of AI, we're at the early stages of, I think, some of the and different offerings out there have different names, but it's a sort of AI personalization, AI optimization, how you want to think about it, so that you can start to look at, through tracking, how are different ads and different placements driving response, and then how do we optimize the right creative to the right audiences at the right times in the right places and spaces. It exists. It's early days, but I think that's going to really help drive the industry, drive performance as well, and I'm super excited about it. And I think some of that goes to sort of the programmatic opportunities, but again, leveraging technology, leveraging data, leveraging AI in really intelligent ways to understand and let the machines, with support of the people, understand what's working, and then driving that and optimizing that. And I think, again, we're here, and we're going to get there really, really quickly, I think.
Very nice. Thank you. think the last topic that we wanted to discuss was surrounding attribution and what we see is next on that front. And I know that we've already discussed pixel tracking and we've got these directional outcomes as well. What's on your mind?
I think, if we talked about the growth over the last 5 years in podcasting, one of the things that really fueled that growth was the addition of video. So people are putting up podcasts that go on YouTube is really driving that growth as well. There's it's from the consumer standpoint or listener standpoint, no one cares whether it's whether it's a podcast or whether it's video. I struggled with that so much in the beginning because to me, if it's audio, right, it's a podcast. If it's video, it's video. You think it shouldn't have both elements, but it does actually. And I've learned to overcome that, not think of it that way. It's content, and it's content, it's content. So more growth from that standpoint, from that perspective as well. I think we're going to have to get nimble. I know from our standpoint, yes, we put up our content does live on YouTube, but we're bringing it on domain as well. So for Fox, we had the Outkick network, which some of you may be familiar with as well. But we do 7 hours of live programming there as well, which is an opportunity to reach. It's a sports endemic network there with right of center in terms of content as well, and we don't shy away from that. We lean into it, and it's been very successful so far.
Well, with shows having a presence on YouTube, that must make it incredibly hard to measure. Right?
Yeah, that's a very, very, I remember initially it was, years ago, it was, we'll take that, but those are bonus impressions. And now it's, is that show on YouTube? We want the shows that are living on YouTube. So there's something going on there that is really driving engagement. And we know that the video elements does drive engagement in different levels, but it's just creates for an overall better experience.
So I think the video part of podcasts is really interesting. I also, not because I work at iHeart Media, where we're a predominantly audio-based company, I think there's something magical and often missed in what audio is and what it does, honestly. And I say that as a consumer. I say that as someone who worked in media agencies for most of my career, quite honestly. I think there's something magical about it. Video has a role for sure, 100%. But 1/3 of people's time spent with media is audio. And there's something incredibly intimate about listening. There's something incredibly valuable about the relationships people build through that listening that happens, as well as getting the creative right from an advertising perspective, which isn't easy, but there's some good ground rules there. So I think there's still a lot of legs to the audio part of the podcast, which I think will continue to be the dominant form. I think the other thing that we're seeing a lot of and we're doing, and we've got a group called Ruby, it's custom content. And it's custom branded content that is, I'm going to say, a lot less branded versus custom content. And we're doing it in a lot of places and spaces. It's compelling. We're bringing in our experts in terms of the content creation and working in partnership with our advertisers to be able to build that. We support that by really using all of our channels, and whether it's radio or streaming or podcast, to promote it and build those audiences there, and giving people long form, giving advertisers opportunities for long form, brand relevant, meaningful content. It's incredibly powerful. And we're seeing it in a lot of categories now. It's not for everybody, I'll be honest with you. You have to have a reason why you're going to create it, and what your objectives are. But I think there's a lot of exciting opportunities there as well in terms of like continued evolution.
Yeah, it's a really interesting space in terms of, branded content and things like that. And I think, in terms of the future for attribution, I'm hoping that we'll get to a place where cross-screen can be measured really accurately, inclusive of podcasts. So when a client comes to us with whether it's a demo target, like women 25 plus, or it's a more strategic target like people 21 plus who are interested in sports gambling or something, that we're able to track all that across all screens, inclusive of audio, and I think that's something for the future that we need to get better at.
Sure. That's a great point. For now, do you see that your advertisers, although they have pixel tracking that they can use, but when they're trying to look at the channel holistically, do you find them using other methods of measurement, for example, an MMM or a baseline model to help prove out the channel? Is that shared with you? Do you? I'm interested to hear why you're chuckling.
I actually think and it's starting, as there's more scaled investment in podcast, you can start to bring those data into broader modeling and analytics platforms and solutions, whether it's multi-touch attribution, whether it's mixed modeling, those sorts of things. One of the challenges historically for mixed modeling, as an example, is if it's a really, really, really tiny investment, it's going to be really, really hard to pick it up. So as things scale, we're starting to see that, and definitely the integration of podcast exposure and audience data into different multi-channel attribution solutions. We play in that game. We want to make our data available to whatever and wherever it makes sense for our advertiser and agency partners. So we're not afraid of it. I think part of that is how do you understand what the data is, what the data isn't, how to get it into the right place, et cetera, with the right level of granularity. But we're starting to see it, and we're starting to sort of have those conversations, and I think it's great. I think when a medium becomes something that is garners enough interest and advertiser investment to be able to feed into those spaces and places, I think that's a good thing. So we're not afraid of it. We're going to lean into that. You say, is it shared with us? It's one of the ironic things, right? We try to build these partnerships, and sometimes it's shared, and sometimes it's shared less. And I think, I always look at it as the more we know, the more we can help, the more we can improve, the more we can optimize, the more we can drive your business as good partners. To come back behind the scenes and kind of be like, it worked really well, but we don't know why, and we don't know what. Or, it didn't work as well as we thought, but we're not going to tell you why. We're not going to tell you what we saw. I don't know how that helps. And I've been in this business for a little while, and I think the best solutions are when we're together and building and learning and driving.
Yeah, I would say, again, just to echo those points, David, again, spending more time, because the data is the data, and you're going to work all of that. We're going to do all of that on the back end and look at all of that. The more time we can spend on the front end, aligning in all the different ways we've talked about, I think we will see better outcomes. And then you also have to stick to your gut. And you, as performance professionals, we know how performance works. And those fundamental principles of the business, they don't change. That's remains constant across whatever platform or whatever we're talking about. So those things come into play as well. We can't forget about that human element, that, I don't know about that. That doesn't seem right, or that does seem right. Let's go with that. Those things often, in aggregate, lead to better results on the outcome. So don't forget about the front end, the human elements as well. The data is important, but so are we.
Great. Thank you, gentlemen. We really appreciate your input. We are going to open it up for some questions from the audience. Does anybody have a question they like to?
Hi, I'm Matt. I was going to ask about deduplication and how you guys might help your advertisers think about it, but Lissie, you basically showed me and told me that they're not privy to that level of data probably from the agencies or advertisers. So I'm curious, just someone who works in video consistently from a podcast perspective, is your attribution that you see more last touch, like someone instantaneously taking that code through the DAI or through a live read or whatever it might be and going right to the site and purchasing that way, or is it with a discount code, or do you see more of like a first touch, like opening awareness piece of it all, like I do in video?
So I'm going to say most of the standard off-the-shelf attribution are using last touch. Now we could, yep. Now in a lot of spaces, quite honestly. Yep, yeah. So I would say yes. Now most of those same solutions have options where you can do fractional, you can do more complex attribution. I love that you're asking that question because I think people need to ask those kinds of questions even more. But if you're running across a whole bunch of different publishers, it's going to be typically last touch. Again, there's more complex, I'm going to say versions of analytics that do fractional or first touch or lots of different things. And I think it's aligning on what matters, what do you believe in, and how do we make sure that it is aligned to that in the most meaningful way. I mean, a lot of what we're saying too is it's alignment on what matters and what doesn't. I mean, I just worked on a campaign and it's kind of interesting. Agency was focused on this behavior, half the advertisers were focused on this behavior, but there was a couple people who were focused on a different behavior. Very hard to align performance to that. So I think there's a lot of, sometimes a lack of clarity about what the attribution model is that's being deployed. We try to be completely transparent about it, and we can always look at options for sure.
Any other questions? Oh, we have one over there, Thomas, behind you.
Hi, my name's Alex, and I am a brand marketer. I manage a brand called AquaTrue, and we got serious with podcasts about 2 years ago. And I'm having a similar situation because I'm a brand marketer, but we care about performance, right? And we're hitting our target CPOs and trying to scale, but we're hitting that wall, and we can't scale with a lot of our shows. Going back to the actual question is, so we built a business with revenue share model, CPA basis with our influencers. Do you guys ever do a revenue share model with our podcasts and your ad placements?
I don't think that's something that we've explored yet, but I wouldn't say it's something that we couldn't talk about.
Okay.
Absolutely, maybe grab you after.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
I would just add to that, we have, very similar to Pete, we haven't done anything in terms of rev share like that. But what we are looking at is going deeper with affiliate partners.
Yeah.
And is there a way to construct deals that bring a brand in from an affiliate partnership that can use that as a stepping stone into other areas of our business as well, and transact with us at some level. That's sort of an easy checkout counter kind of thing that we talk to brands about, and coming on from that standpoint as well. So,
all right, thank you. Yeah, because our influencers, I feel like they're more invested because they are paid on CPA basis than on a one sponsored post on Instagram or on podcasts, you name it, or, so they have that, they want to learn about the brand and the products because they have the incentive to earn payouts. So that's why I asked that question, but thank you. I will follow up then, for sure.
Great.
Any other questions for our panelists today?
One more.
Yeah, I'm really impressed with the growth of this category. I started in this direct response industry 25 years ago. So when when infomercials were first a thing and you could do them right, it became quite a huge category. And you mentioned about, this is a great idea for long form. And to me, I think this is in its infancy is becoming, a way to be able to tell stories and to pinpoint your brands into the exact categories that you're trying to reach. So I think it's fascinating. I mean, again, politically, you see what Kamala has done with Call Her Daddy, with what she's doing with Howard Stern today, with Aaron Foster, having the top show on Netflix right now, with Dirty John becoming a movie that came from a podcast. This is, I think you guys are all, I think this is the future of where long-form storytelling and branding can reconnect again. I don't know if you have any additional comments on that, but I think we're at the infancy of something that's only going to get a lot bigger and a lot broader.
We've recently have begun to launch an opportunity for brands to have an integration into a podcast. Specific shows with specific hosts where we can do this, and it's clearly, it somewhat would replicate a native article where it's clearly an ad, but it could be a CEO of a company that's coming in and able to discuss a product and its relevancy to a news topic or something that is relevant to it, not just come up and talking about your product. It's not a pitch, but if done in the right way, where it's the consumer experience isn't compromised, but enhanced, and it's more information. Yes, it can be a great avenue, and I think you're on to something. I think that it will be something that you'll see more of.
Yeah. I'm sorry, David. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say there's two things. I agree. I think the long form brand storytelling is, I don't want to say it's under leveraged, but it isn't fully leveraged within the space. And I think when you think about the relationships and trust, it's there. One of the things that we do, remember I was talking about that sort of custom content, we'll take that custom content and bring best of into shows, the long form stories in there. And I think Eric, it's a great example. There's all these kinds of examples of ways you can do that.
Yeah, we've had a lot of success with our branded content studio at WBD Courageous, which they work across all screens and actually, can use that audio from a video segment or a film and pull it into branded content for a podcast that's also contextually relevant and makes sense, to your point, to continue on the storytelling from a linear and a digital and an audio basis.
Tom, before we close, can I just say one thing? We've heard a lot today. I sat in on some of the earlier panels, and a lot of the things that I heard, constant theme was adjusting, getting better, continuing to grow. I just want to take just 2 seconds to say that to Tom Hare and John Yarrington, what a fantastic job. I mean, going back from pre-COVID to where we are right now, this event has just gotten better. It's at its peak, if you ask me. It's really fantastic to see. I know so much work goes into it, you and the whole team, to put this together, to make it so great. I think the panelists, everything has just been fantastic. So I just want to say thank you for the job that you guys have done putting this together and making it better and better.
Absolutely agree.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you so much. It's very kind. Very kind. Thank you all. Round of applause for this great panel, please.